Are you ready to organize your amazing ideas into a powerful book? You are in the right place at the right time to learn how to write your book. Hi, I'm Joyce Class, and welcome to the Write Hour, nonfiction tips from the Write Coach team. We are so glad you joined us today. Well, hello, everybody. I'm getting a little bit of an echo. That's weird. Do you hear an echo, Anne-Marie?
Oh, I'm fine with them.
Okay, good. Maybe it was just a thing. And I'm moving my mic because I forgot to do that. But welcome, everybody. It is the Write Hour, and we have Miss Anne-Marie Cross with us. I'm so excited to have her here tonight. I've had the privilege of interviewing her before, and she's been on another live stream with Keith a couple times. So we've had a chance to get to know each other a little bit better through these interviews. So it's always fun to have somebody come back. And if you could tell us in the comments where you are listening from, where in the world, because Anne-Marie comes from the land of Down Under. She's in Australia. It's already Wednesday there for them. And so I'm excited to share with you what she has to offer tonight. So Anne-Marie, welcome.
Thank you, Joyce. Great to be here with you again.
Yes. And I don't know how many people, also tell us in the comments if you're here, if you've ever considered podcasting, or if you are podcasting now or live streaming. I consider that a form of podcasting in a way, because if you create something like I'm doing here, where we have a series that we're going through, and I think, Anne-Marie, you actually live stream your podcast first, don't you?
Yes, I do. And then we take the audio out and publish that down the track on the audio platform.
Awesome. So that's a great way to do it. And we're going to talk some more about that in a few minutes. But first, tell us a little bit about you and your journey becoming a podcaster, as well as you've written a book. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I started podcasting back in 2008 with Keith Keller. We were in the career industry, and back then, if people can recall, was when the global financial crisis hit. And there was so much doom and gloom by mainstream media, which sadly hasn't changed much. And we knew that things were difficult. We knew that many people were without work and things were tough, but we also knew if they continued to listen to the doom and gloom, that would inhibit their ability to get out there, promote themselves, network, and all of those things. So we said, we need to be the voice of hope and inspiration. We started Career Success Radio, and we did that for 2 years. We had no idea what we were doing, but the drive to be the difference for the job seekers around the world really had us step forward and share our message. And then at the end of 2 years, we parted ways. I've continued to have a podcast with all of my different business and entrepreneurship, opportunities. And I've loved that medium. Back in 2008 and 10, I think I wrote my first book, actually. It was to Ace That Interview, 10 Key Steps to Get the Job You Love. And then more recently, of course, I have kind of captured the steps that I took leveraging a podcast as a service-based business to go from, invisible to influential and profitable with a podcast. And that's kind of my second book. But I've loved the journey, the authoring, all great ways to connect and to share your message.
I love that too. It is a great way to connect with people and grow your audience. And I'm sure you have seen that happen from writing a book. Well, tell us a little bit about how podcasting can help writers. And as you know, this is the Write Hour, so it is for writers, and we love to help our writers learn more about growing their audience. And this season is all about connections. And a great way to connect with people is podcast. And I have to say, I've been doing this live stream for my podcast this season, and I'm really liking it because I love being able to connect with people. So tell us a little bit about, how could this help a writer?
Yeah. Look, if you're looking at your business or the reason why you want to author a book, a podcast and incorporating that is really looking at, well, what is your overall goal of your book and also your podcast? And can each of those different mediums of communicating your brand, capturing that message, can they be integrated well? So for instance, if you are just starting your book and you want to go out, so you've got an idea of who you want to interview because you've got your topic, but you also want to have other people that contribute to the thoughts that you're thinking of sharing, validate. So you can actually start a podcast before you launch your book and then incorporate some of the information and the topics that you've gained through those interviews and incorporate that into your book. I mean, you've got many authors that have done that. It's through research, going out and speaking to the people who are there, they're in the trenches doing the work and can provide their input into that. Valuable. In fact, you can really build your thought leadership around that and then capture that into a book. Obviously, there's certain things that you'll need to do legality-wise that you'll need to confirm with these people that you're interviewing to let them know, look, I do want to incorporate your comments and your insights into the book. So obviously you need to get legal advice and things like that, but you can do it that way. And what happens is you continue to build an audience, because what you can then do, and I love doing it this way, that you capture the content, because imagine if you then create a community of people who are interested in that particular theme, that particular topic, they will be able to contribute the questions, the challenges, the things that they're struggling with, so much so that you are really informed about the type of information that you can incorporate into your book so that it can provide solutions to the challenges that people are facing right now. And as you continue to build this podcast audience and community, guess who the audience are going to be when you launch? So you're building your audience before you actually launch the book, and they become ambassadors and they can inform the overall context of the book before you even launch. That's a great way to incorporate both a podcast.
I absolutely love that, because when you can get instant feedback, which is part of why I love having the Write My Book group, is I can go into that group and I can say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you like A, B, or C? And I get instant feedback from people who are my ideal clients, because they're there because they want to know how to write a book. They want to know better skills and how to grow their audience. And so I love that when you do that with a podcast, the same thing, or live stream. And I use them interchangeably, because some people live stream may be easier for them because there is a little less tech involved. And some people, podcast may be better for them because they prefer the audio format and do not want to be seen on video, So you've got to figure out what works for you and what you enjoy doing. And I was reading something today about, it was an email that came through, and it was talking about Russell Brunson and how he talks about how much fun he's having doing what he does. And this person was saying, I had never thought about that. If I reframe the things that I want to do, or like to stay healthy and exercise, if I reframed it as, hey, I'm having fun doing this, it does make it more interesting. And that's why, being here on the live stream, it's fun to connect with my audience. It's fun to bring people like you on here and get to meet people and listen to your fabulous accent, to have here. So I love that connection. So that's something that if you are wondering how to build your audience, this is a great way to connect, to get to know them, to get to know their thoughts. Because here's what's going to happen when you write your book, and people that haven't listened to the podcast, and they read your book and they're going to go, oh my goodness, was she like in my head listening to the thoughts? I was just thinking about this the other day and I didn't know what to do. And I pick up this book and here's the answer. There's things like that are going to happen. People are going to think that you've been hanging out in their living rooms or in their head, because their pain points. And that's the big thing, is you got to know their pain points. So tell us a little bit about what are some tips on interviewing people, because I know that's a big fear for a lot of people if they haven't been on video or even audio. There is some techniques to it. So can you give them a couple tips on helping them with that?
Absolutely. I think when you're interviewing guests, one of the things that you really need to be mindful of is not just the guest, but also the audience.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think ultimately what I want to do is create a platform, an environment where the guest feels where they can step forward and share. They are informed. They know exactly what is expected and what they can share, that kind of thing. So you really want to create the nurturing sequence, if you will, the content to help them be as prepared as possible to be able to deliver the best, give their best to your audience, but also being mindful of the audience, of the different communication styles. And what I mean by that is there are different communication styles and preferences. So when you're thinking about an audio podcast, live streaming now gives you audio and video, but I'm always thinking about audio too, is that you lose that visibility. You lose the ability to connect, to see in that way.
Right.
So what you need to do as the host is kind of step up a little bit. So your energy is going to affect the guest. So if you're a little nervous and apprehensive, then that's going to trickle onto them as well. Similarly, if you've got a guest who's got a bold personality and you're kind of shyer in that, they can completely overrun the interview itself. So you've got to be able to manage that and have that confidence, which will grow. So when I'm talking about different communication styles, when people are listening to a podcast, and again, you've got to know who your audience is.
Right.
You've got to structure the interview as best as possible to be able to get everyone on board, build instant rapport. And I know for me, my audience, they're driven, they're ambitious, they want to get to the insights straight away. So they want to know what's in it for me. And adult learners typically want to know that too. Why should I attention? This is if you're just starting to build with a new audience. If people already know you, then you've got a little, and depending on where you're leveraging your book and your podcast in the customer journey, if you are already giving that to an audience that is established and know you already, you've got a little bit more leeway to be able to share some personal things. In fact, they're interested in you and they love hanging out with you. So that's why it's really important to look at, how am I using my podcast? Who are the guests that I'm speaking with? Am I creating an environment that helps them know exactly what's to be expected? Because the preparation starts from the moment that you reach out to them and say, hey, I would like to interview you. And so what I often do too is when I start a podcast, I'll let people know in my introduction, what are they going to walk away with? I'll kind of introduce my guests a little bit and saying, these are the things that they'll be sharing. Now we'll open up the conversation to dive deeper into some of the content that's shared, but it will be around that framework. So there's I call it an expectation, a promise of expectation and a promise of value. So they know the value that they're going to get and it's expected, and you deliver on that. And so then what you need to do as a host is to be able to manage that, so that if the guest continues to go off track, you just give yourself permission to bring them back. And then you learn some of the ways to do that. And sometimes you need to interrupt. I remember the very first round of interviews Keith and I did back on Career Success Radio. We asked a guest mistakenly, you do not ask guests open-ended questions, because like this guest, 20 minutes later, this still answering. Keith and I were Skyping one another, jump in and interrupt her. And so we were a little bit hesitant to do that, but you've got to give yourself permission. And in the prep, I will say to guests, if I need to, I'll jump in, because I'm doing that because I know my audience, they may lose interest because, the guests might go off topic.
Right.
And, so you've got to manage, you've got to be the storyteller, the guide, and bringing that all together, because people come for the topic, they'll return for the host. They could probably go and listen to that particular topic, many other different podcasts. Right. But if you create an experience where they love to hang out with you, then they'll come back, listen to another episode, and then another episode, and then often a few episodes down the track, I like this host, I'm going to subscribe. And that's all about the experience that you create, and that's how you prep your guest, how you start your podcast, how you lead that podcast. All of that's really important.
I love that. That is excellent. And I hope everybody got all that value right there. Because we could probably stop right now and everybody would be great. But that is high value right there, interviewing people on those top tips and techniques and leading and guiding guests. And it is something that you got to learn to how to transition. And sometimes you've got to learn, if you're not quick on your feet, thinking about things, that it'll come with time and practice. If you stumble at first, it's okay. You got to learn. Don't give up. We don't want to give up on that.
When you hear me, Joyce, say something like, look, it's interesting that you should say that. And it reminds me of, often I'll use that and I'm thinking inside my head, I'm going, where do I go from here? And then all of a sudden, because sometimes if I don't have a note paper, I'll always bring notes, because there may be something that the guest shares, point. And I think I want to go back and segue back. And it is having a conversation. And often what we do, and this is where mindset is so important. And mindset, I'm sure you talk about in a book as well, when we have who wants to read my book? Who wants to listen to it? And once we get over that initial fear and imposter syndrome and everything, and we just think, if this is a conversation that I'm having with this person across the table, what am I interested in? What is my community interested in? And can I navigate that conversation? I remember one of my very first mentors who came from mainstream radio. She said back then, really what we do as hosts on radio, we don't want to let the guest speak for longer than 90 seconds. Now, with a podcast, it's a bit different. I'll only use that rule if I feel that the conversation is waffling a little bit, and I might interject something, but if there is something that I know is really important, I'll let the conversation flow. But you'll gain experience and awareness when to stop, when to dive deeper, when to continue on. And that just comes from practice.
It definitely does. Well, where is a good place for them to start with podcasting? Because that's the thing that people go, okay, great. You convinced me. I need to do a podcast or a live stream, but isn't there a lot I got to figure out and do?
Yeah, there is. And a lot of times people will get worried and hung up on the technology. But look, technology, it doesn't matter what microphone. I mean, real sound, people will often say absolutely everything relies on the sound. But if you are, and I know many of your audience, Joyce, they are wanting to write a book because there's a body of knowledge that they want to share. There's some that just want to do that as part of a story that they just feel has been placed on their heart. But many of my audience, and I'm sure yours too, there's a body of knowledge and they want to get that book out there and ultimately let that book and podcast be a vehicle for which they're going to be able to get leads and inquiries and ultimately clients from that. And in that instance, one of the things that I really want to bust a few myths, and one of them is that you need a lot of listeners to really make a podcast be a success. You don't. And in fact, the smaller you niche, the narrower you go, the faster you will grow. So where do you start? You get so clear on your niche and the message, and you create obviously a book that is tailored to that niche and what they're looking for and the expertise you're sharing. And similarly with a podcast, you also need to be mindful that this podcast is a platform where you can share your insights. You can bring guests on that can collaborate and obviously validate what you're sharing and bring different insights. But let that be also a vehicle that what I call seed and lead. Mm-hmm. So think of the end in mind. And what I get a lot of my clients to do, actually all of my clients, before they launch their podcast, let the first 3 episodes really be where you share your thought leadership, because your podcast, do not compare it to mainstream radio. That's another myth that I want to bust. When a lot of podcasters start and they go, well, I got 20,000, 100,000, 200,000 sponsors for my podcast. I know that they're probably not really going to use their podcast as a way to build their thought leadership and build a deeper connection with audience. Because, and I'd love your feedback on this too, Joyce, the people that I speak to who love to listen to podcasts, we hate ads and ad stacking, ad after ad after ad. I'm out of there. What about you?
I'm hitting the fast forward button, because there are some podcasts I listen to, like it's the same ad every time.
Yeah.
Because, I think Brendan Bouchard's got his vitamin supplements, whatever that he does now. Love Brendan, hate the commercial. It just fast forward through. And there's some other things I listen to that I just fast forward through those because I don't, unless it's something that I might be interested in or I'm doing something where I can't fast forward, then, I just suffer through the 30 seconds or whatever it is of it. But typically I don't like them. And I know that people talk about that as a way to, monetize your podcast. But that, I guess that's never been my 100% goal. My goal has been to connect with people and get to know them, build relationships with them that way. And then if they connect with me, either in my group or become a paid member of my membership program, then I get to know them better that way. And I have things that I offer other places. I don't offer it if I offer anything, I'll put it at the end or the beginning. I don't put it in the middle. And that way, if they want to sayonara, they can.
And that I love hearing that because that's the feedback that I get. And when you have ad stacking, and that's what a lot of listeners, and this is me particularly too, I don't listen to mainstream radio anymore because I just cannot stand the ads and I switch off. There's a terminology for that. So you asked me, where do you start? You need to decide, what is my podcast for? And if you want to follow the mainstream media way and do ads, look, that's fine. But it may take you longer, and probably will, to really nurture and build that level of engagement because, it's just a completely different experience that you create. Something else that I just want to share, and I'm seeing this happen more and more, is when someone has dozens and dozens, even more than that, interviews that have been done and have been kind of scheduled out in the future. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm using my podcast as that aligns with my marketing calendar. And I also use my podcast as a way to build connections with people that I am seeing are working with my ideal clients. They have a community of my ideal clients and they provide a complimentary service or advice, whatever it is. So I'm using my podcast not just as a way to build my reach and my reputation and ultimately revenue, but also my connections. Yeah. And now that many of us are no longer able to go to conferences, I never did anyway because I'm an introvert. So podcasting is a great way for me to connect with people. Now that we are restricted, let your podcast also be a way that opens up opportunities to connect with people in your ideal industry. Like this morning, I spoke to someone. We're looking at doing some collaboration. I've invited her onto my podcast. She's recommending me to another platform. These are the kind of things that you can have. So rather than ad stacking, a no. Don't interview stack either, because you don't know what's going to happen 12 months down the track or even 6 months down the track. And you may find that your marketing has had to shift, just like what we've gone through when, the COVID hit. We all had to change our methods. So imagine if you had back-to-back interviews already done the year before, I'm sure many of those interviews were no longer relevant, or you'd have to do some, changes to the intros and so forth. So what purpose are you using your podcast? And then allow that strategy that you create to be an integrated one that allows you to build momentum, and then just launch, the different steps to that. As I mentioned, I always say to clients, create a 3-part podcast series first, create a beautiful little checklist that, or a quiz that people can download as well. And that's a great opportunity for people who are listening to your podcast and that they are struggling, particularly with some of the things that you can help them with. A beautiful call to action. If this is something you wanted to learn more about, I've created a gift for you, and that's my kind of call to action. That's what I do too. Mm-hmm. The reason that I share that a podcast and audio works really well rather than an ebook kind of thing, the reason is you can still put some chapters in there and incorporate it with the book you're writing, is because primarily in audio podcasts, people are listening. So you want to encourage them to continue engaging with your content in the platform or the way that they engaged originally from. Does that make sense? So you wouldn't get them from an audio podcast to go and watch a video series yet. that's nurturing down the sequence. Sure, give them the audio podcast so that they're still listening, give them a workbook and kind of nurture. And then one of the email sequences could be, hey, download some more chapters. You might do a webinar. You've got to map out the sequence that you're using your podcast in. But that's kind of some things to consider.
I like
first. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And the niche thing that works perfectly aligned with writing, because part of the Write plan, the R in my Write plan, the WRITE for people that don't know, is the writing process. And R stands for reach, which is who is your audience and figuring out who your audience is. And if you have done that for your book or your podcast, vice versa, then you will be one step ahead. If you go to do a podcast, or if you do your podcast first and then go to write your book, that way because typically they're going to be, well, you want them to be the same people. Because if you're going to go all to the effort, you don't want a podcast about cooking and you're doing a book about meditations.
Yeah.
You're going two different directions there. Mm-hmm. Now, you may talk about meditations if you want to talk about cooking, or vice versa, or you might want to bring in, hey, I learned this new recipe that helped me, whatever. But you want to make sure that it's clear and concise. And like for me, my audience is people who want to write a book, and typically they are new writers. They've never written a book before. Mm-hmm. And they're in the entrepreneur world, some kind of personal development typically. And so, and I actually niched that down. It took me a couple of years to do that, but I'm in a group called 20K Nation. And Claudia, that's one of the first things we had to do was figure out who our audience was. And I thought I had it figured out. And I forget what it was originally. I think I said speakers, coaches, and something else. And she goes, but that's a lot to say. Who are all those people? What are all those people doing? And when she said that, I went, personal development, because if you're a health coach, a business coach, a life coach, that's all personal development, and that if they're speakers, typically that's motivational speaking, that's personal development. So it all falls under that big umbrella.
Yeah.
That you gotta, it's a big umbrella, but it's niche.
No, it's interesting. I just redid one of my programs called Business Foundations, and one of the modules, the first actually, is your lucrative niche, because unless you know that, the message, the brand that you're really wanting to project to really cut through and speak to that audience. And, there's a couple of ways that people can niche. They can niche to a demographic, but really narrow down. So, some people, one person might be a fitness coach, but you can niche down to women. You can niche down even further to women who are younger women, to women who have had younger women who have had children and want to get back to their baby, pre-baby weight. You can see that if you niche to that, you've gone from working with women in the fitness industry to working with women. Everything that you have written in your book and have that on your podcast, the guests that you have continue to speak and to share information around that. So there's expertise that you can niche in, or you can niche in a certain industry, or you can do both. And I think a lot of times people don't tend to really get clear or narrow enough, or what they do is their message is so broad that it really, that saying, master of none, jack of all trades.
Master of none, yes.
Happens. So there's a question here, Joyce, that Corey asked about any suggestions for the length of my podcast. Which is a great question. And really, again, it goes to what we were saying earlier about know who your ideal client is. If I think back to one of my clients, she started a podcast with busy mums who were working in the direct sales industry. And she said, I want my podcast to be what they tap into when they're picking up the kids and they may be waiting outside school, but it's short and sharp. So she knew that her podcast, because of busy mums, would be about 10, 15 minutes, enough to give them some valuable insights, and then off they could go juggling all of the millions of balls that they were juggling. And so know who that ideal client is, what their time commitment, typically where they will be listening or watching, and that can really help inform the length of your podcast. I've got a rule, and I often say to people that I'll tell you the golden rule. It's the number one rule in podcasting, and that is that there are no rules other than the rules you set yourself, and that will often be determined on you, your audience, expectations, and of course, what's the goal in mind, what's the end in mind for your podcast, and then that can inform. So sometimes your podcast can be 20 minutes, sometimes it can be 10 if it's an insight that you want to share. So I would say vary it up a little bit, or ask your audience.
Right. That's the big thing. Ask your audience, because I mean, I've heard people say they do 2 and 3 hour podcasts, and I'm just like, oh, there's no way I don't want to do one, and B, I would never listen to one that long. And it would have to be something really fascinating for me to listen.
3 hours. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think, I love, for me personally, and that's where you've got to figure out, what is your audience like? Do they want the 15, 20 minute, give them the nugget of truth, talk about it a little bit and dive deep in it, and then you're on your merry way? Or do they like typically mine are 45 minutes to a little over an hour. Sometimes I try to keep it around the hour mark, because that seems to be the sweet spot for me. By the time we dig in and we talk about the topic and ask some questions and bring some more in, then that's really good, to a good time frame, and I usually have, like, I've got 7 questions for us today, and that covers it. That covers all that whole hour. So you'll learn how to gauge what is good for your audience, what's good for you, what works for you. Somebody's commenting about Corey's commenting about the dog here making crazy noises. She was running around being a spaz, and this is Corey's comment here. Feel right at home. Yes, when everything's, I've been working here all day. She's been over here just minding her own business, sleeping. And last night and tonight, at least she's not barking. Last night we were on a Zoom call and she was barking, and I had to mute myself a couple times. Like, what is your problem?
Too, where I've had someone knocking on the door, and I've just been quiet, and it got louder and louder and louder, and I didn't realize, or later on, he thought he was knocking on my neighbor's door, so he was messaging her. No one's at home. She said, my mother's at home. She's just deaf. Knock louder.
Oh, that's great. Oh my God.
So I had to keep putting myself on mute and thought, what is wrong with that man?
Can he not figure out I'm not answering the door right now?
Anyway.
Oh, that is super
joys of podcasting. You know what? That's another rule. Expect it all to happen. And you've just got, like, I'm glowing all sorts of different whites and everything. I've got my blind down and lights on and off. Anyway, you just got to do
so
it.
maybe Dawn wants to start her own podcast. She probably could.
Yeah.
So the last one, next question is, what mistakes do you see people making with podcasting?
I think not doing what we shared earlier, not really thinking about how am I using my podcast, not having that strategy, not really having or realizing that, my podcast, I want it as a way to build my reach, to create another platform where I can bring my book to life, where I can have conversations with, because, you may have in your book, and you may be using your book as a way to really build reach about your business. So some of the things that you might be interviewing, or the topics could be clients, that are sharing their case studies. So not having a clear outline, not having a clear end in mind, and not having the right strategy. And I think also too, not really understanding that even when you've got all of the right things in place, there are other things that you need to be mindful of to get that message out there, to be constantly, promoting it and sharing it and building connections with other people in the industry. It's just one of those things that we need to do. And I think sometimes, as business owners, we can get a bit disillusioned when things don't happen straight away. But they happen. They really will happen. Don't be disillusioned if you're hearing someone talk about having millions of downloads. Some people want to start a podcast because they really want to build that celebrity, but that's their goal. And look, that's okay. You might really be wanting to build reach with a smaller and highly niched audience, because you know that your ideal client is struggling. And if you don't get this message, if they don't do the things that you can support them with, they're going to remain stuck. So again, be mindful of that, and don't be distracted by the celebrity type numbers and that kind of thing, because you could have 1 million downloads and no one investing in your services. Much rather have 1,000 downloads and my community be sharing, be stepping into my programs. And so be clear on that and don't get disillusioned.
It is. And I want to just circle back because something that you mentioned earlier, which goes along with this, is, you talk about strategy and marketing. If, like, for me with this podcast, my strategy, my plan, I do seasons. I do 6 episodes per season, and then I take 2 or 3 weeks off and start the next episode. And I plan out, like, I'm almost to the end of this season, and I've got 1 episode planned for season 15 so far, but I kind of know where I'm at right now to know what I got to figure out my theme for season 15 yet. I haven't done that, but like this, season's connections. And if you have a strategy like that, where you have a theme that is supporting the business that you're doing, whether it's your business is to sell more books, or if your business is to gain clients, then if you have a strategy that goes along with that and marries that, it's going to support that so much better. And it's easier. It's so much easier to do because, when I tell people, my guests, hey, this season I'm talking about connections. Can you come tell me about podcasting? They're like, sure. Emery's like, not a problem. So you want to have that kind of thing and figure out what works for you. I do not recommend starting off with a daily podcast unless that is something you really are going to be committed to, because that's a lot of work. Start with, once a week. And then if you want to build up, do twice a week, 3 times a week. See how you do it. See how your audience reacts. I know there are some podcasters that were doing daily and they bump back down to like 2 or 3 times a week because their listeners told them, hey, it's too much info. I can't take it all in. Plus I'm listening to so-and-so and so-and-so, and I can't listen to everybody every day. And that way they get a chance to listen to different people at different times. And again, that's knowing your audience, and that's staying connected with them. However it is, wherever your audience hangs out, that's where you need to be to know what's resonating with them and what's not resonating with them. And then what was the other thing that you said about the ads? We talked about that. Love all that. So we're going to kind of glide over here now, because I know you've written 2 books. And tell us a little bit, when you're writing a book, what's your writing time like? Do you have a consistent time that you write, or do you write daily, or just, once a week, twice a week? What are some things that work for you and some things that didn't? I always love to hear what other people are doing, and because it gives us ideas like, I ought to try that, and just see what. So tell us a little bit what your writing time's like.
So if I look at the way that I wrote both the books, some of the similarities, what I like to do first is create a framework. So I kind of know where the story is going, all the topics that I'm going to share. The first book that I wrote, Ace That Interview, the topics that I wrote about were the questions that most of my ideal clients were struggling with. And I thought, the reason I wrote that book was so many people were saying, I wish that you could do the interview for me. You're so good. And so my time was limited. I could only do so many interview coaching sessions a week before I got burned out. So I thought if I put that in a book, it's something that can be complementary to the work I do, or that people can go and share. So again, what's the end in mind? And I let that guide me. With my second book, what I did was I used that book as a way to get the knowledge out of my head into a sequence that
Mm.
someone could read and it makes sense, because I knew that I wanted to base the book also on my training program. I knew that it was also going to be a course, so that kind of informed that. Now, the reason why that's really helpful in the framework, because, and you would know this, you would be the expert in this, but it helped me. There was a beginning, there was a middle, and then there was an end. And
Mm.
I filled in the pieces. Again, I tapped into the headings. There was information that I knew that I needed to share, I wanted to share, but I reframed that in a way that spoke to the most pressing challenges and questions that my ideal clients were struggling with. The second book was called Invisible to Influential, How to and Profitable with a Podcast. So very much around the branding, positioning with a podcast. And so once I got that framework, it wasn't like I was sitting staring at a blank page.
Mm-hmm.
It's often easier to write or edit the content that you've already got there. So once I got the structure, what I would do was go out and find out, well, what articles have I written? What topics have I shared on social media platforms, like the status posts? And I copied and I pasted relevant content that went with the framework. And then from there, I kind of identified, well, where are the gaps? Where are the things that I need to add? And it was slowly putting it together that way. And then I went through the content as it was fleshing out. Are there things that I can create, such as a graphic? Like,
Mm.
is what I'm explaining, can that be put into a picture, created into a picture, a diagram that would help that learning? And then that's kind of informed me as to that. But I feel it was like painting by numbers, but writing by the framework and the content that you already have. And that really helped. There were times where I procrastinated like the best of times, and I can, when I knew that I needed to get this chapter done. I'm the worst procrastinator that I am. Have you heard, Joyce, of the Colby A? The Colby A, where it measures your cognitive your MO and where best the environment and what you're working on really motivates you. Well, I'm a quick start. And so often we can procrastinate, especially if it's like, oh, I can't think. So what I did was I changed locations.
Wow.
And found a space. And what I would do too is, being a quick start, I know that when there's a deadline or something that needs to be done, we will get it done. So what I would do was I'd grab my phone and I would put a timer on for 30 minutes. And then I would go, I need to get X and Y, Z done by that time. And if I can do any more, well, then if there was something that I would, give myself or whatever, I can buy that book if I get more done. Well, if it was a book that I really wanted, you can bet your bottom line that I would create that. So there was different things that I knew were
Driving
really
yourself is what you're doing.
I was driving myself. That's right.
I love it.
Years ago, I had to finish off an assignment for one of the career certifications, and I did everything up to the point where I had to write like an essay. And I remember it was just going on and on and on. And eventually the lecturer came back and said, are you ever going to get that to me so we can finalize it? And I told Keith, I've seen a handbag that I really love. I'm committing that if I get this finished, drafted, edited, and emailed off, I'm going to get that handbag on Monday. Well, that essay was edited and sent off on Saturday, and I was bringing that nice handbag to church on the Sunday.
There you go. There you go. I love that. And I love what you're talking about, the timer. I do that too. It's kind of like you can have this race against yourself of, hey, and that's, have you ever heard of 5,000 words 5,000 words per hour by Chris Fox?
Oh, no.
He talks about that. He said, it's your trigger and reward.
Yes.
And he goes, and he talks about habit. Well, I don't know if he calls it habit stacking. That might be another thing, but it's essentially the same thing. What he was talking about is, if your trigger is, like for him, is to get up in the morning and have coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And his reward, he likes to scroll through Reddit and Facebook and stuff. But what he doesn't do that until he has written, for an hour or 30 minutes or whatever it is that he wants to do that morning. Yeah. Then he'll reward himself with going through Facebook or whatever. And so I love what you said about that, because the other thing about changing places, That was something I was listening to today. I can't remember the exact context of all of it, but the reason we like things when we're doing things, and you're talking about being a quick start, we like things that are novel, they're new. So when you change locations, your body's like, hey, this is cool. We're in a new place. Let's do something fun. And that's a way you kept the novelty going for yourself by changing locations. Whereas for me, I do better being in the same place. This, where I'm at right now, this is my desk. And it's like, if I sit here and write, my body's like, okay, cool, we can write. I haven't ventured off, and I've had tried one time writing at a coffee shop, and it was so distracting, it drove me crazy. Because I used to live in a college town, and there was these college kids. They weren't being obnoxious or anything. They were just having a conversation, just being themselves. But it was distracting because I'm a nosy person. Like, they're talking about that.
Yeah.
And I'm not concentrating on what I'm trying to concentrate. So, for me now, I know it's quiet music and in my little cocoon here, and that's where I need to be. So I love but if you are like Anne Marie, different places may be perfect for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It works really well, and not just in writing, but for me, creating frameworks and even training is jotting it down. I've got so many notebooks, but you just never know. There may be a thought or a sentence or a phrase that you jot down that can really be something that ties together. So I'll often journal things, write things out, then I'll type out the framework, and then kind of the words flow. That really has worked well. I love how you said about music. Music is good for me too. I don't listen to things that have words though, because what ends up happening is I start singing, and then there goes half an hour, especially if there's some worship songs there, and you're off. And so, and I think it's so cool knowing what distracts you, knowing what distracts you. Yeah.
I love that you've got the framework thing, but I've got the Abide app, and it has just instrumental music and like nature sounds. So that's been perfect because it's like kind of like white noise. I can sit there and just kind of get lost in the sound and be concentrating. But I love what you said about framework too, because I created the right plan is a framework to teach people the writing process. And I teach that in Write My Book Boot Camp. And that is what makes it easier. And everybody who does the right plan, once they actually get it, because it takes them, a little bit at a time. It's not that it's hard. It's just like, because it's a different way of thinking. I'm not an outlining kind of person. And it's about 6 questions that you answer. But they're very thought-provoking because you got to think about, okay, well, where am I really going to go with this? How can I really help this person? And when you do that, it does make it so much easier. It is fill in the blank. It's like, okay, I want to talk about this in this chapter, and I want to talk about this in this chapter. And one guy he's doing traditional publishing, and I helped him do the right plan to plan out his book so that he could send it as part of his book proposal. And he realized as we were doing this together, he was like, oh, you know what? That could actually go with this chapter, and that could be moved down here, and that be in better order. So that's the other thing, is you get the big overview, the 50,000-foot view when you do the right plan, and or a framework like you're talking about. And then it's so much easier to start writing because you know who you're writing to, and you know what you're writing about. And so then you start writing and get the information out. Wow. So what words of advice and encouragement do you have for writers who may be struggling with this marketing idea and they're not sure, well, is podcasting for me? Do I need to interview? What kind of encouragement do you have if they're debating whether this is the right thing for them or not?
I love that you've asked that question. And I think as businesses or as individuals who want to write a book, we've written a book and we now need to get that out there, you need to understand that there's different ways to market your book. There's so many different ways to market your book and ultimately your business. You've got to ask yourself too, does a podcast, does it fit in naturally to who I am? For you, it may not. not. So I then would say find something that really ticks all the boxes for you. And so really some words of encouragement is think about some of the pros and cons. What are some of the pros? How will it really help you? What are some of the things that you're a little bit hesitant about? Now, if you look at those things that are on the list, in the category of what I'm hesitant about, if they are things such as technical things or things that you can get a response and answer and that no longer is going to be an issue for you, then I would say at the end of the day, this could be a really good strategy to use. But if you're finding that the things that you've got on your, I don't really, it just doesn't fit in with your style, then don't do it. For instance, I probably will never do reels because you'll never see me bopping like that. And I mean, I just know if I had to do that, like seriously, I couldn't do that. And you know what? I've just given up. I've just given, me the permission to say I probably would never do reels. So you've got to really understand, is this something that I can do it and can do well? Or is it like, yes, when you think about speaking, you might be nervous at first, but you'll be able to, if you kind of check to see, do a pro and cons list, that you'll see whether this is something that you really want to do. Because I think the last thing that we want to do is launch into something and then down the track and think, it's not for me. Because then often what happens is you get disillusioned and you don't want to kind of, walk away from something that you think, but something that I do want to share. And I love the way that you said about seasons. Here's another rule to podcasting. You can do a season and then that be it. But it's so evergreen that you can continue to use that. And then if you ever want to continue your podcast, do it. I would just, at the end of last year, someone launched their podcast and it was a season, 13 episodes. He said, I do not want to do any more. Maybe I'll do another season down the track. And it's evergreen content that he's using as part of his marketing. So, the words of advice is get clear on what you want to do, your expectations. If a podcast does fit in with what you want to do not feel pressured that it has to be something that you do on an ongoing basis, that you have to publish every week. You don't. Fit it in with the strategy and what fits in with what you're doing.
I love that because, not everything is going to work for every person. And there are probably some people out there would say, oh, you have to have a podcast if you're going to have a business. And that's not true. There's people that built businesses with other forms of medium that they get things out there. But I'm a natural talker. It's something I enjoy. And when you were talking earlier, I meant to mention, that's been one of my favorite things about having a podcast live stream is interviewing people and get to know people. Because by the time you initially talk to them, you set up the time for the interview, and then usually after the interview there's a little bit of a chit chat time, that you really get to know the person and they become a connection and maybe even a friend. And that's been the fun thing is all the wonderful people I've been able to meet. Now for some people that may be absolutely terrifying, and that's not your thing, and that's okay. And that's what I love about, with writing. Like you said, there's many different avenues, and I love sharing with everybody the different avenues, but there's not one hard and fast rule that everybody has to do all these things. Now, there's a couple of things that you would definitely want to have. You want to have a website and you want to have a social media presence of some sort. It doesn't have to be all the social media. You can do just Facebook if that's where your people are at. Just Instagram, and like you were saying, you will never see me doing TikTok either. Or somebody spiked my drink.
Find a way of this, but I'm not on TikTok either. There are some incredible, people on that, and that's great because it fits their personality style. And leverage what really works for you. That's
I have a bonus question for you because it just popped in my head. Clubhouse, have you tried that yet? I've got an invite that I need to use and I haven't used it yet. Have you tried?
And I've had a couple of conversations, and my goal is to be more active on that. But there's a few things that I need to finish off first, and I've committed to myself, get those finished first and then start to leverage on that too.
I'm the same way. I'm in the middle of a project that I'm doing the 6 steps to organize your ideas and start your book now. For those of you that are wondering, it is on its way. Hopefully by the end of this week, it'll be done and I can start promoting it next week. And I've got a couple of people that are in the Write My Book group that are going to test it out for me too and give me some feedback on it. But I just wanted something simple and quick for people to just pick up, and it's 6 easy steps that within about 2 hours, you could have your first chapter written. And they don't have to be 2 consecutive hours. It can, because I've broken it down to like 15, 30-minute exercises that you could do over a couple of days if you want, or you can do it all in one day if that makes you happy. So, but that's coming up soon. Now, I know that you help people with podcasting, and we've got links on the show notes, but tell them a little bit about how you help people that want to learn about podcasting.
Yeah, fantastic. So I have my Podcasting with Purpose program. So it's a 90-day program, idea to launch. And so for 90 days, we go from idea right through to launch. We map out the key 3-part series, your quiz if you haven't already got one, the branding, all of that, and really just getting that all set up. Launch sequence, everything, idea to launch within a group environment so that you don't feel alone. Now, one of the things that I'll always say to people is, if you're not sure on whether a podcast, you're ready yet to start a podcast because you haven't really clarified your message. And one of the things to often say to show you that maybe you're not ready is if one of the reasons you're starting a podcast is because your message isn't cutting through the noise and you do feel like the world's best kept secret, then really focus on getting that message clear first before you launch a podcast. So one of the things, and I don't know if I shared with you, Joyce, I've started the influencealliance.com, which is really this business building community, which helps put the core business foundations in place first so that they can already start to generate money with clients. And then when we know that the message is working, we layer a robust podcast strategy on top of that and then really map that out. I mean, I've got a client who was going to launch her podcast, but she's rejigged her business a little bit now, and we created her quiz. She's already got VIP clients. She's had a group coaching. She's building out her course, and then she's going to layer the podcast on top because she knows that, the podcast message that she shares will integrate with her nurturing sequence. So that's theinfluencealliance.com, which is that.
Yeah, and that link is in the show notes in case you didn't hear that, and I'll put it in the comments here. But I didn't realize that they were kind of built on each other. I didn't realize the two were.
They do, and the reason is, and this is really a lesson that even I share with clients. This is going to be valuable for the authors who really have a coaching or a consulting practice. When I did a bit of an audit on the clients and where they were at, some of them launched their podcast and then went, what now? What do I do with it now? And then others weren't ready yet. So I thought, if I create this community, there'll be people that will launch their podcast. They want to remain in that because they want to build out their funnel, incorporate other things into it. And then others will be getting ready to launch their podcast. And that community supports both of those people. They're change makers with a message to make a much bigger impact in the world while build a sustainable, scalable business that they love. So that's what that community is all about.
I absolutely love that. And Corey is excited about that. So Corey, check out the show notes. It's therightcoach.biz/1405. And I think it's in this post here. I think it's on the link is in there. I'll make sure it is. But I so appreciated this, Anne-Marie. Is there anything else you want to share, or anybody have any questions while she's sharing her last tidbit before we hop off of here tonight?
Well, I think the last tidbit that I would share is one that really challenges people who think, well, I don't have a message to share, or I don't really think anyone would want to listen to me. I mean, really, if you've got a body of knowledge or support, and if we think about what's happened in the world today, you may just have walked a journey learned insights. That is something that someone needs. So by not getting that out in a book, by not getting that out in a podcast, and by not sharing your message, people are going to remain stuck. So, there is a message, your message, there is someone, there's an audience out there, and just go and share your message.
Definitely. I love it. Share your genius with the world is what I like to say. And we appreciate you being here. Leave comments if you've been watching. If you're watching the replay, leave comments and we will be happy to reply and help you out as best we can with your questions. And if you want to get to know Anne-Marie better, again, check out the show notes. It's the link Corey Lee did tell me the link is in this post here. So you just click on that, therightcoach.biz/1405. And if you're out watching on YouTube or you'd like to watch on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live. So I appreciate everybody being here. Have a great week and thank you.
Thanks, Joyce.